In this video, I'm going to walk through an example of activity-based costing and bidding on jobs. We've got a company that removes potentially toxic asbestos insulation and related products from buildings. They work on a combination of routine and non-routine jobs, and they've been using to this point a traditional costing system. However, they're suspicious of whether it's creating the most accurate costing. Why is that important? If we're potentially not costing as accurately as possible, it also affects our pricing. And therefore, we may be attracting sales that aren't as profitable as we anticipate. On the other hand, based upon our price point, we may be discouraging certain sales that really are more profitable than we anticipated. They want to explore using activity-based costing, which is also known in what I'll use by the acronym going forward as ABC costing. To this point again, they've been taking their overhead of $1,740,000 and applying it based on one plant-wide predetermined overhead rate. I don't know if that's going to be based on labor hours or machine hours, irrelevant here. And what we want to do is separate out that overhead based upon the activities that are happening with the company. So basically we'll have more individual overhead rates based upon the actual activities happening within the company. They've identified the major activities driving the overhead as removing asbestos, estimating and job setup, working on non-routine jobs, and then another catch-all category, organization sustaining, just keeping the overall organization functioning separate from an individual unit, an individual job, an individual customer, individual product. Our first task is to take these different elements of manufacturing overhead, for example, wages and salaries of $300,000, and divide it amongst the major activities that we feel like are really driving this overhead to occur. For example, talking to individuals in the business, they've identified that they feel like 50% of wages and salaries is related to removing asbestos. 10% is related to estimating a job setup, 30% is related to working on non-routine jobs, and 10% on other. So our first task, again, is to take these individual categories of overhead and separate them amongst the activities. I'm going to work through removing asbestos with you. For example, again, wages and salaries, $300,000, 50% of that, so multiply it times 50%, which is $150,000. We're going to list under removing asbestos. I'm going to work down instead of across this time. Disposal fees, $700,000, 60% of that, 60% times 700,000, so 420,000 of disposal fees is going to get allocated to removing asbestos. I'm not going to talk through each of these individually. I'll just end with, for example, licensing and insurance, 400,000 times 30%, or 120,000 is allocated to removing asbestos. When we add all of these down, we have a total of 776,000 of that 1,740,000 is going to get divided into the removing asbestos category. In the interest of keeping the video brief, I'm just going to give you check figures for the other major categories so you can work through individually and make sure you can come up to these same figures. For example, the total of the 1,740,000 allocated to estimating job setup is 119,500. Working on non-routine jobs, 643,000 is allocated to it, and other 201,500. Just to note, and for the working on non-routine and other, I've got those highlighted in yellow to make sure you work through those on your own and come up with the total figure. Estimating a job setup, I don't show the calculations, but I show the end figures. If you look at, I want to point out, disposal fees and licensing insurance, you don't see anything there, but it's not highlighted in yellow, because I already have the correct number there, and the correct number there is 0. If we go back to our table of percentages, note that 0% of disposal fees and licensing insurance are related to estimating and job setup, so that's why we ultimately don't see anything listed under there. Now that we know we've separated out that 1,740,000 overhead amongst the different activities. We'll create individual overhead or activity rates for each of these activities. For example, removing asbestos, we feel like what drives it to occur is based upon the number of thousands of square feet. So just like we did with a plant-wide or departmental predetermined overhead rate, we're going to take the total estimated cost, here that's 760,000, divided by the estimated activity, which is going to be 800,000 square feet. 776,000 divided by 800, keep in mind it's already noted in 1,000 square feet, is 970 per 1,000 square foot. So not per foot, but per 1,000 square foot. Estimating and job setup, 119,500 estimated. Cost divided by 500 estimated jobs, because we feel like jobs is what drives it. It would be $239 per job. Activity rate for working on non-routine jobs, 643,000. That's a substantial amount that we feel like is just related to non-routine jobs. It's driven by the number of non-routine jobs, which is 100. 643,000 divided by 100 is going to be $6,430 per non-routine job. Now, I do not, and you may feel like, well, have you just hidden it? I don't have an activity rate for other, and that's because we're not going to attempt to allocate organization sustaining costs, which our catch-all category of other contains of 201,500. We're not going to try to allocate that to units, to batches or jobs, or to customers or products, because even if you took one or more of those away, that would exist in total. So it might include things like the rent or depreciation on the facility, items like that. It's not going to change, so we're not going to try to allocate that down amongst our ABC costing. Now that we have our rates, we can go ahead and attempt to allocate some of that to our jobs. So we have a number of different jobs we're going to work through trying to cost. The first one is a routine 1,000 square foot asbestos removal job. And they want both the total cost for the job and also the average cost per 1,000 square foot. So let's work on this job. Keep in mind, it's going to include 3 major cost elements potentially. That's removing asbestos, which is $970 per 1,000 square foot. This is a 1,000 square foot job, so we'll just take that 970 times 1, and we're going to allocate 970 of removing asbestos costs to this job. Note, I don't take 970 times 1,000 because the 970 is already in 1,000 square foot job. Estimating job setup, $239 per job. Well, it's just one job, so I'm going to add $239 to it. Non-routine job, this is a routine job, so we're not going to allocate anything related to a non-routine job. It's not applicable. So we add this up, 970 plus 239. That means the total cost of that 1,000 square foot job is $1,209. Because it is already a 1,000 square foot job, we just take the total cost divided by 1 because it's already 1,000 square foot, and the average cost per 1,000 square foot is 1,209. Sometimes that's tricky. Folks think they need to divide it by 1,000. It's already in 1,000 foot. Next, they want us to cost out a 2,000 square foot asbestos removal job. So very similar to what we did with the first one, $970 per 1,000 square foot for removing asbestos, this time times 2, which is $1,940 in removing asbestos cost. It's still estimating a job setup, one job, so we're still going to add in $239 for estimating a job setup. It's non-routine, so not applicable. We don't add any, or excuse me, it's not non-routine. Had too many nons and nots in there. It's a routine job, so we're not adding non-routine job to it, so that would be 0. Total cost of the job is $2,179. Because this is 2,000 square foot, We'll take that 2,179 divided by 2, and the average cost per 1,000 square foot is $1,089.50. Our last category is a non-routine 2,000 square foot asbestos removal job. I'm going to let you figure out the removing asbestos and estimating and job setup costs related to it. So this, I'll note, this isn't a zero that I have here. I'm going to let you figure out. What I do want to note is this is finally a non-routine job, so we are allocating the $6,430 to it because it is non-routine. Again, I'll let you work through the rest of the total cost and the average cost for that last job. Hopefully this helped you become more comfortable with working through ABC costing.